Okay, it says live now. We'll just give it a minute for everybody to come on board. All right, I think we'll just get started. Great. First of all, thank you everybody for joining us for a webinar. We are going to today talk about quantifying enterprise cyber risk to enable digital businesses. I am extremely excited to introduce you to my co-speaker Douglas Hubbard, somebody who I've been looking up to personally as a mentor for a while now. And Doug, just to read out a few lines about you, you've been a consultant, you've been a speaker, you're the author in decision sciences and actuarial sciences. You invented the applied information economics method and founded the Hubbard Decision Research. You're also the author of How to Measure Anything, more relevant to this talk is how to measure anything in risk and cybersecurity. So we're truly honored to have you in the talk here, Doug, and thank you so much for accepting. We will start off by talking a little bit about the whole digital revolution which is going on, the importance of actually why do you need the measurement matrices which are out there, and then we'll hand it over to you, Doug, where would love to actually tell you and ask you around your thoughts around risk quantification and how do you look at the evolving area of risk quantification. So we'll just quickly get started. While we do that, Doug, do you want to just take a minute and introduce and just talk to the audience while I pull up the slides?
Oh, sure. Well, hi, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm Doug Hubbard. As Saket mentioned, I've written a few books about this. I'll review them just very briefly when I open up my presentation. But we've been working together for a little while here in terms of how we can add decision analysis, quantitative decision analysis methods to cybersecurity risks. So it looks like they're well on their way to doing that, and this is a great approach for doing that sort of thing. Are you about ready there, Saket?
Yes. Do you see this? Do you see the slides also, Doug? Here.
Yes, I do.
Perfect. Okay, so I hope you guys can see my slide, and we're just getting started where I spoke to you about the topic of this webinar. We'll just get started by giving you something which all of us already know about, the Solarwinds Hack, right? And it almost sounds like a plot from the science fiction movie where something which was there almost for over a year being exploited with a security company and exploiting and seeing some of the most critical information which mattered to governments and private organizations around the world, and we all know how that unfolded. And the reason I start from there is to give a perspective, especially to some of you who actually don't come from the cybersecurity world, of how real the cyber impact is on organizations of all scales and sizes, whether it's a government organization or private or even individuals, frankly. The key thing which is driving this impact of cyber breaches is cyber by itself. In fact, I love this line which Dan Schulman, CEO of PayPal, said, that we went from being Flintstones to Jetsons in about 9 months during the pandemic. And the reason why this is important is because of this digital transformation, the executives' mindset towards technology's strategic importance has drastically changed. In fact, majority of them want to be investing much more to get a competitive advantage. It's no longer about back office automation, and somehow getting your, an advantage on your bottom line. But it's really going to that point that if you do not use technology, it will be an existential crisis as an organization that you would be into. And because of that, not only is the dependence on technology growing, that means that the risk that technology possesses for the overall business is growing like crazy. And this is a very good, insight, which is done by one of our partners called Focal Point in the US. This is a good stat around more than 65 organizations that they actually interviewed, and their CISOs and their boards. And when they asked CISOs of how confident are you about your organization's security risk program, only 13% said that they're not confident, while 42% said they're super confident. But when you ask the boards about the same question of the same companies, only 5% said that. If you think about it, right, and these are all Fortune 2000 companies that were interviewed, these are supposed to be the most matured, advanced, well-informed organization about their risk that they are sitting on. And if you see such a huge disconnect, and if I added lines by asking to the CFO, to the cyber insurance underwriters, to the chief compliance officer, to the general counsel, etc., we'll probably be seeing an extremely varying kind of graph on the right side of their confidence on the security program. Why is that the case? The answer is simple. You do not have standardized risk matrix which actually talk about the security risk posture that the organization is today sitting on. If you think about it, right, this is an actual survey done by the World Economic Forum, and this literally came out a few months back. This is the Global Risk Report of 2021, which actually puts cybersecurity as the number one man-made risk of worry which is out there. And that's really gone on top of the charts when you talk about things that needs to be measured and managed in a far better way. And that is the reason why, because even after spending billions of dollars, cybersecurity, to be accurate, it's around $150 billion industry globally, growing at around 15% year over year. And when that's happening, even after spending that kind of money and seeing that growth, the problem is simple. When you purchase a new cybersecurity product in the environment, or if you replace a cybersecurity product in your environment, or even worse, if you remove a cybersecurity product from your environment, the impact of that to your security risk posture, to your security program's efficiency, is not measured objectively, does not have an objective answer that if we invest X amount of dollars, if we add a new capability in form of an EDR, or add on top of a SIM, a threat hunting capability, or an XOR capability, what would that impact my security risk posture? In fact, I like joking about this all the time when I talk to CISOs, that most of the cybersecurity products that gets procured is not the one that you need the most, is the one where the salesperson was the most persistent in going ahead and making sure that the product gets sold. And unfortunately, that's the reality with not only the largest Fortune 200 companies of the world, but all the way down to small and medium businesses, where the conversations are very threat driven. That if you don't buy cybersecurity products, the world will come to an end. Your company may collapse, etc., etc. But it's not risk driven. Like a marketing conversation today that you have, that if we invest X dollars into marketing, this is the impact on sales that we can expect in a span of next 12, 24, 36 months. That's a very clear conversation to have in terms of ROI. Unfortunately, the ROI of cybersecurity is not objectively calculated, and even if it is very, very subjective, with subjective interpretations, with 2,000 questions being answered by various stakeholders, internally, externally, by an individual auditor which would come in and do things around that. And that is what needs changing. That is what needs that real-time dynamism that comes into it. And that is why it's becoming so critical in order to measure dynamically your cyber risk posture. And the reason you need to do that is because when a hack on a digital first business, which by the way will be every business in the next 5 years, when a hack happens, you're not just talking about a hack where the data got stolen only, right? Starting from it disrupting operation, finances, brand reputation, customer retention, intellectual property, regulatory scrutiny, legal, supplier relationship, etc. There's this host of stuff which really goes ahead and gets impacted. And this is a Cisco security research which was done, and a Cisco report which actually talks about that. And therefore, a hack is no longer just another incident which comes in, and there's a tiny little blip in your reputation or your revenue only, but it has a ripple effect which actually has a lot of tangible and intangible attached to it, which is out there. This is the key reason why, if you think about it, right, thinking of enterprise risk simply from a perspective of, how do you look at your threat landscape, your open vulnerabilities. And again, by the way, when I say vulnerabilities, it is not your CVE IDs only. Vulnerabilities can be your antivirus not updated, your phishing campaigns and people clicking on those is also a sort of vulnerability. So I mean vulnerability from a higher realm, which is any gap across your people, process, or technology. And that married to business consequences. This is not multiplication, but these three talking with each other, these three being married to each other, to be more accurate, this is what is breach likelihood. And that's where you use the Monte Carlo simulation with business consequences to come out with the dollar value risk. And for us, that's the only meaning of enterprise risk. Because when you talk about enterprise risk, rather than saying red, amber, green, or ABCD, or high, medium, low, how can you come out with something more objective, something which is far more easier to understand without subjective interpretations of red, amber, green kind of thing which is out there. And this, even the view itself, we've been pleasantly surprised, because we obviously have been working on this for a while now. But I can say, with our experience of working with multiple Fortune 500 companies and talking to them, more than 90% of them would not even see risk in this format. For them, risk will be, risk comes down, and we know that these are the 20 programs we are running. The conversations are very program driven, project driven. They are never risk driven in general sense, or even if they are, they're risk matrices driven. And of course, Doug will be talking more about it, on how that itself is a huge challenge. In fact, this was again a good survey done by the Ponemon Institute, which actually said only 9% of security teams feel that they are highly effective in communicating their cyber risks to their board, while 71% of security teams says that their senior risk managers and executives do not communicate the risk goals efficiently. So think about it. Not only is the bottoms up a problem, but even the top down is a real problem. And imagine, it is almost like a recipe of disaster when you really think about it like this, because you're not even aligned to what is your inherent risk, what is your residual risk, are you in the threshold of what is an acceptable risk which is out there, what is an acceptable risk. In most cases, none of these things are actually defined, and that actually almost becomes like a recipe for disaster for so many companies that we've seen in the past. So does your enterprise cybersecurity strategy resemble the identical stacked set of data sources? In fact, according to Gartner, the cyber risk quantification is a method for expressing risk exposure from interconnected digital environments to the organization in business terms. Business terms is the important part, not in terms of, we have X number of CVEs open in our environment, or there are X number of people clicking on the phishing campaign, and we have so many incidents that we responded to, etc., etc. The key is, how do you go ahead and translate bits and bytes to dollars and cents? That is where magic lies, because that is the business term that everybody understands, and put things together. So that's like the high level overview. And remember, you cannot mitigate what you cannot measure. The popular lines of John Doerr, which is out there. In fact, this is the actual stack up. Okay, this was supposed to be playing in PPT because I'm using Bright Talk. I don't think this will be playing, but this is actually talking about each industry's dollar value risk impact. And this was the IBM data breach report that you guys can go back and check. But coming back, the main point there is, because there is very, very little objectivity in looking at risk, whether it's in an enterprise level or it is at a on ground, asset by asset, employee by employee, third party by third party level, which is out there, that is creating a lot of issues. In fact, this was an interesting survey done by Ernst and Young, which says 28% of boards or management teams have no comprehensive understanding of information security to evaluate cyber risks to prevent and preventative measures. And this is only Fortune 500 companies that they actually surveyed last year, which is out there. So the point I'm making there is that even something as fundamental as what is the breach likelihood in the next 12 months is a question which is not answered to most of the for most of the organizations, and that itself is a very, very challenging thing which is out there. Forget about a more qualified question, but you're not just talking breach likelihood in general, but what is the breach likelihood of a state sponsored hacker? What is the breach likelihood from a script kiddie? What is the breach likelihood of your organization from a hacktivist or from insiders or from third parties, et cetera, et cetera? So that is where a lot of conversations we see now have started going. And that's the reason why Gartner actually put automating risk assessments as one of the top 10 security projects for 2021 also. And there needs to be enterprise wide, which is not just looking at things which are in a siloed way, but like firewalls, looking at things only for the network, EDR looking at only at the endpoint. But there needs to be an approach which is enterprise wide, something which is very sharp in terms of giving output. The way you get a blood test report, you get hemoglobin count, and then you get a number and you get a range. And as long as the number falls in the range, you know that you're safe. So exactly like that, something which is very objective, enterprise wide, integrating people, process, and technology. It is not just technology. In fact, 90% of breaches have a people element involved in them. So how do you involve people, process, and technology, both for first party and third party, and not doing these as a one-time questionnaire-based assessment, really doing it in a real-time fashion is what is really the need of the hour. And that is the reason why why we've been talking all about how do you in a dynamic way quantify the enterprise cyber risks to enable digital businesses which are out there. I'm going to pause there and actually turn over to the real expert on quantification, because Doug, you're somebody who spent almost 3 decades only looking at quantification, not only across industries, whether it's pharma, aviation, also cybersecurity, but you've actually gone ahead and published a book on those lines also. Doug, we'd love to take your thoughts of what do you think about quantifying enterprise cyber risk, especially for digital businesses which are on cloud, on-prem, and really fast moving in their digital transformation journey, and take your views on that. Doug, over to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Saket. Well, my first answer to that is it is quantifiable. You can speak about any risk in a way that informs decisions, that improves on your current strategies. Now, Saket mentioned I'd written a few different books. These are 4 of them. I just finished the second edition of that second book, The Failure of Risk Management, which discusses enterprise risk management and risk management in general. But the 4th book is the one that's specific to cybersecurity risk. My first book was called How to Measure Anything, and that dealt with a broad range of topics. In fact, I have applied methods like this to military logistics and forecasting box office receipts for new movies, or the COVID pandemic, or the impact of environmental policy, or measuring engineering risk in a mining facility, or prioritizing R&D in aerospace and biotech and large IT investments. And of course, we've been doing a lot of work in cybersecurity risk analysis lately. I call this basic method that I've used in all these environments applied information economics. It's really just the practical application of quantitative methods to real decisions. So we try to apply methods that come from game theory, decision theory, statistics, et cetera, to measurably improve decisions over and above what people may have done with softer methods or their unaided intuition. So I like to ask clients, really in any field, what's your biggest risk? In this case, what's your biggest cybersecurity risk? What is your biggest risk in cybersecurity? And I think the answer should be, in many cases, how you measure cybersecurity risk. If that's broken, if the method you're using to measure it in the first place is broken, then you're misguided in terms of how you allocate limited resources to mitigate that risk. And of course, that could apply to any type of risk, as I mentioned. So, what are some methods we talk about to mitigate these risks? Well, they're all models, by the way. And this is really important to know this. When someone talks about something being too complicated to model, you're modeling it even if you're using your expert intuition. Your expert intuition is a model. It's not reality, it's a model of reality. It's based on what you can selectively recall from your own experience, and it has a measurable performance. In fact, it has been measured many times in lots of research. You could go a little bit further and use what seems like a structured qualitative method, some sort of ranking of things on high, medium, low, or red, yellow, green, etc. We'll talk a little bit about the performance of those methods. There's also traditional accounting style methods, entirely deterministic. They don't take into account uncertainties or anything like that. They pretend as if each number is known exactly, even when they know that they don't really know everything perfectly. And then, of course, there's a wide range of quantitative probabilistic methods. And even among those, some are better than others. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about the relative efficacy of each of these. Well, first, let's take a look at which things they actually use. What are the methods that people actually use most? Now, implicit in all of this are the fact that people do use their expert intuition, but if they're going to use something they call a structured methodology, what is it they're actually using? We've done multiple surveys in cybersecurity and in other areas, project management, enterprise risk management, and what we tend to find is that one particular method is the most common. That's the risk matrix. Probabilistic quantitative methods are less common by a lot, and I think we're really counting those generously. If someone said they're using probabilistic methods, we counted that as a use of probabilistic methods. And then there's a wide variety of other kind of softer qualitative methods that may not explicitly use the risk matrix. Now, I'll talk about what the risk matrix is if you're not familiar with that, but I suspect if you're a cybersecurity crowd, most of you have seen the risk matrix before. What we want to know is, how do we know this stuff works? Well, there's actually some research we need to take into account. It turns out to be easy to fool ourselves on the efficacy of different methods. There's been some research in different areas about the effectiveness of adding more structure to decision-making methods and estimation methods. These have been applied in estimating the outcomes of sporting events and horse races and the performance of investment portfolios, even determining whether or not criminal interrogation suspects are telling the truth or not. In each of these areas, and there's a wide variety of areas, researchers found out that confidence always went up. Confidence went up whenever people adopted what seemed like a structured method, and it was going up even when the measured performance was going down. When they actually measured, did the estimates and the decisions get better over time? Are estimates more accurate? Do they have less error? And is there a higher return on investment portfolios, et cetera? Even in those cases where there was no performance improvement, or even when it got worse, confidence still went up. We refer to this as the analysis placebo. If you adopt a methodology, you're going to feel better about your estimates and decisions. That's not the same as actually having a measured improvement. So we need to ask questions like, even based on our expert intuition, how do we know that works? Lots of people claim lots of experience in cybersecurity and other areas of risk management. There's actually been some research on the relevance of experience in a wide variety of fields. And a couple of researchers that I end up citing quite a lot in my work, Daniel Kahneman, he's one I'll mention once or twice more. He won the Nobel Prize in economics in 2002, but he's not an economist. He's a psychologist. He developed what became later the foundations of behavioral economics, behavioral finance. And what they determined is that if you're going to have experience, in order for that to convert into learning, which is not something you can presume to be the case, you can't assume that's the case. For experience to become learning, you need feedback, and that feedback has to be consistent, meaning that you have to get feedback almost all the time. Almost every time you make an estimate or a decision, Most of the time, you have to find out whether or not it worked, okay? That feedback has to be relatively immediate, and it has to be unambiguous. Now, is that really the world that cybersecurity risk managers or most decision makers really live in? If your risk on some particular event went down from 10% annually to 4% annually because of some risk mitigations you made, how long would you have to wait to observe that uh, annual frequency actually went down? Well, decades you'd have to observe it to be confident that it actually went down from 10% to 4%. So you don't get immediate, unambiguous, or for that matter, even consistent feedback on these things. We need different methods of determining whether or not a method works. The best way to do it is looking at independent research on the components of the methods that we're using. Well, risk matrices actually, even though they seem pretty simple, have multiple components. One component is the rating of something on a non-probabilistic scale, like a scale of 1 to 5, even though it may be converted to a probability. And then putting those 1 to 5 scores on a matrix like this. This has been studied, and it turns out not to actually improve things. No doubt, as we talked about with the analysis placebo, that people feel better with the adoption of the risk matrix. And I've had people, after I've gone through, presented extensive research showing that they don't actually work. I've still had people say, yeah, but we've been using them for 5 years or 10 years and they work well for us. Again, I challenge them. How would they know? It's not like they get frequent feedback on these small risk reductions that they tend to implement, going from a 5% chance of some catastrophic risk, which is, can be very high in some cases, down to a 1%. You would have to wait a long time to see if that were the case. So you have to look at what the research says, because we know we're susceptible to analysis placebos. And here's 2 really important studies that get cited a lot. One is this guy, Tony Cox, who looked at a fairly mathematical approach to all of these, comparing the attributes of risk matrices, and he concluded they could be worse than useless, meaning they're not just a waste of time, they actually add random error to decision making. The only reason companies may not be doing even worse using risk matrices is because they apparently routinely ignore the output anyway, or simply re-engineer the risk matrix to say what they intended to say. It very rarely tells them something they didn't know, in other words. Likewise, a very large study in the oil and gas industry, which looked at methodologies for 30 different risk matrices approaches for engineering risk. Now, this is oil and gas, but if you looked at these risk matrix methodologies, they would be, you couldn't differentiate them from cybersecurity risk matrices. After looking at empirical data on the performance of these things and the largest literature review of all of these studies, they concluded risk matrices should not be used for decisions of any consequence. So fine, if your decisions don't have any consequence, you can use it, I guess. But I think cybersecurity is consequential. So we get back to something I call the meta decision. The meta decision is the decision about how you make decisions. The first thing you got to do is start with components that work. All the pieces of the methodologies we've been using have actually already been studied. You don't have to wait for feedback in your own environment. You don't have to sit and wait to just observe whether or not risk actually went down in your own environment. There's a lot of other data to rely on. There's even been large clinical trials on the performance of different methodologies. We should refer to those. Don't rely on anecdotes or claims of best practices. There's no clinical trials behind those claims. And we need to answer specific questions like, what's the probability of losing more than X in the next 12 months due to event Y? If we're not answering a question like that, that's just an example of one, then we're not really doing risk analysis, because you need to answer that kind of question. Ultimately, you're doing it one way or the other, whether you think you're doing it on, quantitatively or just in your head. You're ultimately attempting to ask a question like this and answer it, but you're doing it without being explicit about any of your inputs. So what does work? Well, there's been, as I mentioned, a large number of studies on alternative methods like quantitative statistical models for making estimates of things. And these have been tested in many cases where a human or group of humans and experts in various fields are compared to statistical models. to estimate things as varied as prognosis of diseases or the outcomes of sporting events, business failure rates, etc. And one researcher, Paul Meehl, he had said that he could only find 6 out of over 150 where the humans did just as well or slightly better. And he says that it's pretty conclusive at this point. There's been so much research saying that statistical models clearly outperform human experts. Also, a really large study was done by this guy, Phil Tetlock. He wrote Super Forecasting, if you're familiar with that book. But prior to that, he wrote a book called Expert Political Judgment. And it was the culmination of a 20-year project where he kept track of over 82,000 forecasts with probabilities from 284 experts in a variety of fields. And he said it's impossible to find any domain in which humans clearly outperformed crude extrapolation algorithms, less still sophisticated statistical ones. So why don't we just adopt quantitative methods more widely? Well, there's a few different reasons, but before I get to that, I'll mention a couple of other studies that show that we actually do make better estimates and decisions when we adopt quantitative methods. Now, many of you have an IT background, and as such, you may already be familiar with what a Monte Carlo simulation is all about. And there is research that shows that you actually make better estimates, better forecasts if you build Monte Carlos. And so I won't go into all the details behind that, but we use Monte Carlo simulations because we need to do the math with inexact numbers. We need to do the math with probability distributions, things where we don't have exact numbers like a balance sheet or an income statement would have. We need to make forecasts that are uncertain. And this gives us the basis for a real quantitative risk analysis that would be familiar to quantitative portfolio managers or actuaries or quantitative risk management in nuclear power, et cetera. Basically, all the people who do quantitative risk analysis. And if you can do that, you can actually generate something like this curve down here. This curve represents the probability of losing X amount or more in a given period of time. You know, maybe there's a 40% chance of losing 10 million or more in a year, and maybe a 5% chance of losing a few hundred million or more in a given year. That is a mathematically unambiguous way of expressing probability of various losses. And if I can do that, which you can, by the way, we do it in a wide variety of environments, including cybersecurity, then you can actually compute a return on control. You can monetize risk. Therefore, you can monetize risk reduction. And if you can monetize risk reduction, you can compute a return on control. Now you've got the value of the risk reduction and you've got the cost of the control, which you usually have a better handle on. There's a variety of reasons why people don't adopt these methods, and they're all misconceptions. I won't go into all of these, but over the years, I've been collecting these various misconceptions. And one that comes up a lot in cybersecurity is we'd love to measure that, but we don't have sufficient data. You may have heard this yourself. That's actually a very specific mathematical claim. When someone says that, does that mean they actually computed the uncertainty reduction they would get from a given amount of data? And they computed the economic value of that uncertainty reduction to determine whether or not the effort was justified? No, they didn't do that. They're winging it. They're winging it every time. Or they're saying, maybe cybersecurity is too complex to model, or you've got a dynamic changing technology and intelligent actors that are going on in this case. Well, the question I like to ask is, how does our intuition or qualitative methods alleviate any of these issues? Of course, they're complex, but you're not alleviating any of those issues by not using quantitative methods. You should simply look at which methods measurably outperform others, given all of these complexities. And guess what? Statistical models do outperform qualitative and pure unaided intuition. Now, I'm going to briefly mention there are a couple of reasons why people object to quantitative methods. Again, I'll cite the research of Daniel Kahneman and one of his colleagues, Amos Tversky. But people seem to have fundamental misconceptions about how statistics work in the first place, how random samples work. I actually did a survey in one of the cybersecurity studies I did for preparing for my 4th book on cybersecurity risk. We asked some questions about preferences and attitudes towards quantitative methods. And we also gave people a quiz about basic probabilistic concepts. Now, overall, we found that there was slightly more resistance to the use of quantitative methods among cybersecurity professionals. They didn't think it was realistic or practical. But when we broke that down into the people who scored above the median on statistical literacy, there was a lot more acceptance. And in fact, really, the vast majority of the resistance to quantitative methods came from people who scored at or below the median on statistical literacy. That's where that's coming from. It's not based on being informed about these sorts of things. They're just some general misconceptions that people have. So how should we think about measurement and quantifying things in general? Well, this is probably one thing that might be counterintuitive for a few. Measurement is not an exact number. It hasn't been that in the empirical sciences for the better part of 100 years now. It's really meant a quantitatively expressed reduction in uncertainty based on observation. That's the way we should think about probabilistic models and measurement. Measurement is a quantitatively expressed reduction in uncertainty based on observation. So you start out with a lot of uncertainty, you make a few observations, do some relatively straightforward math, and then you have less uncertainty than you had before, and you're making better bets. You're making better informed decisions. So regardless of what you're trying to measure, I always tell people these three measurement maxims. I call them measurement maxims. And I just tell them, look, no matter what you're trying to measure, it's been measured before. So the best cybersecurity models use what there is of publicly available research. And there's really quite a lot if you're resourceful about it. So you have more data than you think. And this includes your internal data too, not just the publicly accessible data. And you need less data than you think. This comes from some pretty powerful mathematical methods. People routinely believe they just need tons of data. They can't figure out, how much data they actually need in order to make a conclusion. They just generally believe they need a lot of data to measure something. But when you do the actual math, people are usually surprised at the kinds of inferences you can make from even a few observations. So I'll just summarize by saying, here's some things you need to stop doing right away. Just stop doing risk matrices. Just go cold turkey on them. If you've got a risk matrix meeting on Friday, just repurpose that and start talking about implementing quantitative methods, because it's really not helping. It may seem like it does because of the analysis placebo, but it's really not. And we need to start adopting methods that are based on proven approaches. And we'll talk a little bit about some of these things just now, but probabilistic methods, including Monte Carlo simulations. We might talk a little bit about how to calibrate experts. So even if you do have to use subjective inputs, some subjective methods measurably outperform others. We should know how to implement those sorts of tools. We don't exclude the human expert at all in these problems. We just use them in the way that's measurably better than the way they've been being used. And of course, historical observations. And if we're quantitatively explicit about our risk, then we can quantitatively state our risk tolerance, which is another important topic we could spend a lot of time on. But I'll wrap it up really at that point at Socket and ask you if you had any questions for me.
No, this is incredible. Doug, can you hear me? I'm just starting to get accustomed to this, to the platform.
Yeah, I hear you fine.
Okay, perfect. No, this was extremely insightful, Doug, and in fact, that's the lines on which we've been trying to really talk to various of our customers, and I can actually share a couple of examples of some really matured customers, because the concept of quantification of risk, what you spoke about, Doug, is something that it's not new, as you already pointed out, and it is something that people have given it a shot or given a first stab at, whether it's internally or trying to do that externally. And invariably, I mean, we've actually seen companies say, hey, you know what, oh yeah, we know quantification, we've seen GRC companies do that in the past, or there are companies which do outside in assessment and then they do some quantification, or there are companies which come in and ask us like 2,000 questions, and then based on the answers, they actually provide some degree of quantification which is out there. I think the key missing areas in almost all of these pieces is, how do you actually marry things from an inside out perspective, because there's very little information, there's very little value that actually comes by only an outside an assessment which is out there. And to share an actual example of a number of customers that we have today, let's take an example of a Fortune 200 company today, which actually looks at which actually uses our platform SAFE, which is all about digital business risk quantification. They actually had an internal team of 4 people whose full-time job was risk quantification. And I still remember walking into the meeting, virtually, of course, these days. And when you do that, you actually had them say, you know what, we've tried a lot of stuff. We've seen a lot of stuff in the market. We don't think anything fits in because, it would just not be customized to our environment, or at the same time, it will not be married to our risk matrices. And they actually opened up a sheet with red, amber, green of, what is the, risk that they're sitting on and how do they calculate it. We actually bought that sheet and gave it to our, research and analytics team. And we actually showed them so many examples where on the same cell of amber, that their own algorithm would actually mean a $50,000 risk, and the same cell will actually mean $5 million of risk. And they were like, wow, yeah, that is true. And we actually never thought of it, because even our presentation to the senior management, we've always been following this risk matrix approach which is out there. And therefore, and as you said, Doug, that a lot of quantification doesn't have to be an absolute accurate output. It is also about uncertainty reduction, where probably that window from 50,000 to $5 million shrinks to, say, only for a few $100,000, right? So you actually take that uncertainty down based on internal, external inputs which is out there. So this customer, they've of course started using our platform, and now they have like 14 business units, and every business unit has a real-time breach likelihood score, and that's real time. If anything changes in an S3 bucket that goes on the internet, if there's an EC2 instance which has been detected by malware or a vulnerability, or they have a SaaS application whose configuration drift is out there, or their on-prem assets which are out there, which just got detected with a new vulnerability through a Qualys Tenable, or their EDR tool, or their GRC tools, which is actually talking about their policies. Anything which fails comes in as an input, along with the whole list of external parameters of the external threat intelligence. We marry that together to actually give out a score, not only for every single asset using Bayesian network, which will be my next question for you, Doug, that, out of a lot of ways of looking at risk, right? Why does Bayesian shine in so many industries? But before I come to that question, coming back, so this customer, right, and it's a very large enterprise, starting from a micro level where they get a safe score for every single asset on ground, rolling up to individual business unit. So you're now talking about a score for business unit 1, business unit 2, business unit 3, which is their crown jewels and what really matters. And now this is a score, this is a breach likelihood that you can go ahead and the CISO and the deputy CISO, they use it for their risk committee meetings. They actually use it for their internal alignment between the CISO's team, the CTO's team, which is also the CIO's team. They have the same CTO, CIO with the same title, and of course the CRO, which is the Chief Risk Officer. And you put all of them aligned in a much better way, which is out there, and not just for internal first party. The last example I want to give is with this very, very large company, which has more than 10,000 franchisees around the world. So you're actually talking about how do you get a score for your third parties from the inside out, not from only the outside in. So whether it's franchisees, or there's another Fortune 50 company we are today working with as a customer, where we give scores for their suppliers, for their distributors. These are mostly small and medium businesses, but because their suppliers and distributors have the data of this Fortune 50 FMCG company, when they get breached, this large brand, which is a Fortune 50 brand, is what will have an impact there. And that's why they needed something which is inside out and dynamic and provides a breach likelihood in a dynamic way, which is out there. So these are like good examples of how some really large Fortune 500 companies today are using our product live. Doug, I want to come back to you because there can be so many ways of looking at risk, and you're somebody who's actually spent, I would say, a lifetime of looking at this in various industries, right? We chose the Bayesian model, which is out there, to predict the breach likelihood. And then when we marry the likelihood with the consequences using the Monte Carlo simulation, which you mentioned, we actually come out with a dollar value risk of the company without cyber insurance and with cyber insurance. So Doug, would love to take your thoughts around Monte Carlo and Bayesian, and what are your views around how does the uncertainty gets reduced in a slightly better way than the other models of dynamic risk quantification which is out there. Doug, over to you.
Yeah, sure. Well, think of Bayesian methods. It's a whole branch of statistics by itself, even though it's also at one level, it's some very simple formulas, but it's also a whole branch of statistics, where the opinion, the point of view that it takes is that prior beliefs or uncertainties are updated given new information. So a lot of statistics doesn't work that way, but Bayesian methods work on the whole approach that you have a current state of uncertainty and new observations update that current state of uncertainty. So that's a different approach. That allows us a lot of flexibility in how we can make inferences from what seems like very limited data. I show some examples of that in some of my slides here. I often will ask, people that go through our training, um, this urn of mystery example. I imagine I've got a warehouse full of urns, and each urn is filled with over 1 million marbles, and each marble is either red or green, and the proportion of red marbles varies from urn to urn. So it could be anywhere from 0% red to 100% red, and the remainder being green, and everything in between is equally likely, 62%, 41%, etc. Now, if I randomly select one of those urns, there's a 50% chance that the majority color is red, just based on what I just described, what we call our prior uncertainty. But if I select from that a single marble, how confident can I be that the majority color is red? Well, based on a single sample, and you can do the math on this, it may be counterintuitive to people, even if there's 1 million marbles in there or more, make it 1 billion. A single marble being sampled, if that marble is red, there's a 75% chance the majority color is red. If it's green, there's a 75% chance the majority color is green. Now, this may seem counterintuitive to people, but it is based on the actual math, and it's easy to simulate this to check it. In fact, this is something that comes up quite a lot in cybersecurity. Think of the red marbles as a breach. Now, maybe you've been working as the CISO, the CISO at a given Fortune 500 company for 8 years. And in those 8 years, you have not seen a major data breach yet. If you had no other knowledge other than your immediate experience at that firm, what's the probability that you'll experience a breach next year? Some people would look at that and say, I have no data on the rate of breaches because I haven't seen one yet. That's not actually true. That's not the way to think of it. You have enough data to show that breaches don't happen 90% likely per year. They're not 80%, et cetera. If you've gone 8 years in a row without seeing it, anything greater than 50% is pretty unlikely. There is a way to work that out. It's actually based on something called the beta distribution and an even simpler form called Laplace's rule of succession. If I drew 8 marbles in a row from an urn and they were all green, the chance the next marble I draw is red is actually 10%. And we can show that. That actually comes right out of the math, and it's easily verified. So I talk about these examples a lot of times when people ask questions like, how can I make inferences out of such little data? Well, the math stands behind that. And some of the math is pretty old. I won't go into it in great detail, but some of it's very simple as well, right? And Socket, you're using a couple of these. You're actually using Laplace's rule of succession along with Bayes' theorem in general. And this is the basic form, and I won't spend a lot of time on it, but it just expresses how I can update my current beliefs based on new information. And Sackett went a little bit further. He's using a form of this equation down here. If I have multiple conditions, multiple different pieces of information about something, how can I add them up to change my level of uncertainty, to reduce my level of uncertainty about something? And of course, this is how quantitative portfolio analysts and actuaries and statisticians in a variety of fields deal with that problem over and over. We don't have to reinvent it for cybersecurity. I'm seeing so many tools out there, Socket, that are basically trying to reinvent how probability and statistics work. They're just making up more red, yellow, green, and more more risk matrices and qualitative methods and so forth. It doesn't have to be reinvented. Cybersecurity is not that unique. It's important. It's become very critical, but is it really different than having intelligent actors in insurance against theft and kidnapping, etc., or major economic calamities, or warfare, etc.? There's lots of things that are complex and have intelligent actors, and where the technology is changing constantly. Cybersecurity is not new in that case. It certainly, the basic math has not changed at all. The basic math is the same. So I think this is what cybersecurity needs to build on: is the quantitative solutions that already exist. They're proven. They're necessary axiomatic consequences of basic theory in probability theory. And it's important to note that we use probabilities not because we have perfect information, not in spite of having perfect information. We use it because we have imperfect information, okay? We have imperfect information, therefore we have to use probabilities. People often ask me, how do I put exact numbers on these things? If you had exact numbers, you don't need probabilistic methods. We use probabilistic methods because of our uncertainties, and that's what we try to build on. We model our current state of uncertainty. We do the math when we get additional observations. We can reduce that uncertainty, and then we can turn that into monetary consequences, and then we can allocate our resources rationally. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, Doug. And just rephrasing what you just said, it's more about the first principles and going back to them, and really using the first principles which have always worked in terms of coming out with more accurate decisions. And I think, I like looking at it like this, right? I think of it as a first, second, and the third and the fourth industrial revolution we are at right now. There's a lot of learning that has already come in. I still remember, again, talking to this was the P&G CIO that I was talking to, and he was mentioning that, Saket, the problem in cybersecurity right now is when we ask CISOs or, senior security, analysts that, why don't you quantitatively tell me what risk you're sitting on? They say, no, we can't do that because there's too many moving parts, and, there's a lot of known unknowns and variables, et cetera, et cetera. And he was giving me this analogy, and I loved it, that if you think about it, think about the first and the second industrial revolution. And he said, look, when you buy a Head and Shoulders shampoo bottle today, what is the odds that you think it will have bacteria in it and it'll spoil your hair? And I said, well, never have I thought about that, right? If it's Head and Shoulder and I'm buying it from a Target or a Walmart, and I'm pretty sure that the standardized quality control has been taken care of. He gave another example. Boeing is a bad example these days, but Airbus, and if you walk into an Airbus airplane, right, an Airbus 320, how many times have you actually thought that, look, I'll not make it on the other side and I'm really worried? Well, probably a very little number of times, right? Now, these are products of the first and the second industrial revolution, and they have hundreds of thousands of moving parts, chemicals, or things which are, and think about an airplane, right? It has both inside and outside moving parts which are out there, and despite that, they've come to a quantified solution of quality of their safety, which is out there, and we just have to reuse those principles. It's the variables that change, but the construct of the first principles remain the same. And that's what we get to learn from people like you, Doug, because you've done this for so long, for so many industries. No point in reinventing the wheel. In fact, what you've said is a good point where, again, one of the CISOs, and this was a large Fortune 500 banking CISO, he said, Saket, the thing which I love about what you guys have is, I've never thought about it, but think about it, right? When my vulnerability assessment tool or my anti-malware or antivirus tool gives me a score, because they all have a score these days, right? If you ask and double click on that score to say, what's the meaning of the score? The general answer will be, well, if you have a better score, the risk comes down. Is it linear? Is it does that impact my internal factors, external factors? Or if I qualify the question even further, is that risk score, which according to a lot of OEMs would be there, the risk from Russian state-sponsored hackers, or is that risk that you have from insiders? Or nobody answers that, right? And that's where, when you use all of these aspects, put that together, it really makes so much sense. And that's the reason why we feel we're truly at the cusp of revolutionizing how cybersecurity is managed around the world, Doug. So thanks for that. We have one question. We left with 5 minutes, so I'll just get to the question. It says, it comes from Andre from Arkinova. He's a friend of ours. I would describe Arkinova as the new age marketplace for insurance providers based out of the UK. He says that we love the power of your approach and the ability to look outside in and inside out to truly look at the value at risk, which is the VAR, with a business dictionary which the board understands. Now, could you speak to the way you reconcile this, the people and the process variables while understanding the risk? Because most providers only focus on the hardware and software tools and largely ignore the people and the process which is there. Henri, thank you so much for this question. And this is a very relevant one, because when we thought of enterprise-wide cyber risk, it was incomplete. We did not see people and process. In fact, 90% of hacks have a people element to it, or have an element where the policy was not defined in the right way or not implemented in the right way, et cetera, et cetera. The way we have the common answer between people, process, and technology, because even inside out, saying I'll do a large deployment which will span a year to look at 100,000 assets of yours does not fly anymore. The magic word there is API first. So when we have over 100 API adapters that we've built, right? I have a team of 150 engineers full-time working on the product. So when we get that API first approach, which is out there, and provide that API tools, whether it's from your technology side on Security Center, AWS Security Hub, or your EDR tools, or your vulnerability management tools. For policies and processes, we integrate with your GRC tools. So whether it's RSA Archer, Metric Stream, ServiceNow, we've taken hooks from there. The controls which are out there, they get mapped to our policy controls which are there. And then, they actually have an impact on the score of people and technology also. And obviously on the people side, we actually have a fairly unique way, again, through API hooks, whether you have an email security solution enabled, deployed, your phishing campaigns, and we hook in with that. We have our own app, which I would highly recommend each one of you to download. It's free of cost for consumers. It's called Safe Me. It'll actually, it's both on iOS and Android. And when you download that, you will get a safe score for yourself. And by the way, the score actually is calculated using a Bayesian network of variables that we put together. And again, the score between 0 to 5, which is simply a multiplication of 1 minus the probability of breach that we see through an individual. And that probability of breach, or is basically, that comes from the Bayes theorem that Doug was saying, which is basically the probability of event A given event B for conditional probabilities which are out there. So I highly recommend all of you to download the app. Andre, for individuals, we actually give a score for every employee of your company using the mobile app called Safe Me, and taking hooks from your people assessments tools which are out there, put all of that together in the Bayesian network to come out with the breach probability per individual, and then you can cluster them together based on departments or all of the individuals together. So I hope that answers your question. And of course,
I have one thing I could add to that, Simon. Yeah, I guess part of the assumption there at Henri's question is that people and process are soft. We've measured them many times. We measure them routinely. I measured people and process related elements earlier this week. It usually happens at least once a week on various projects we're on. So they're not that soft. They are observable. Once you figure out how you observe it, you're halfway to measuring it. The rest is just trivial math. So anyway, I thought I would add that in since I know we're running out of time, Socket.
No, absolutely, Doug, and thank you so much for adding it, because it again goes back to what we were talking about, right? When you look at Industrial Revolution 1 and 2, out there also you had people, process, and technology, right? When you calculate the risk of a factory running, you definitely need the other two elements along with the technology to be working. And again, that's been solved multiple times. You don't need to reinvent the wheel, which is out there. Learn from what mistakes and the learnings from the past, and yeah, excited to make new mistakes, because that always happens when you're trying to disrupt something. So, anyways, this has been incredible. I know we are on top of the hour here. I want to wrap up by actually announcing something very, very exciting that I'm personally very excited about. Being a first-time entrepreneur, I'm whether I'm fairly deep tech on technology, high on energy, as you guys probably might see by now. I'm jumping all the time, but what I don't know is how do you actually go deep into individual topics which really make the organization, whether it's risk quantification, whether it's building the team culture, etc., etc. So, as a lot of you guys know, that I've been fortunate to have the likes of John Chambers and some of the most incredible angel investors and advisors supporting, backing, mentoring our company. In the same league, I actually am very, very happy to announce, and very honored to announce, that Doug, you officially formally accepted to become a part of our advisory board. And young companies like us always look up to people like yourself who've actually been there, done that, seen the entire movie so many times, so that we can learn from all of those movies, so that again we don't make the mistakes which have already happened, and really short circuit our path to where we want to get to. So thank you so much, Doug, for accepting to be a part of our advisory board, and thank you for doing this webinar with us. This is hopefully one of many other webinars that we'll be doing together in the near future. And if Doug, if you have any final thoughts to share, please go ahead, and then I'll just wrap up.
Well, and thanks for having me, Saket, and I'm looking forward to everything else we're doing together. And I would say that cybersecurity, obviously, as you all know already, is not trivial, and we should be willing to invest our intellect and time in getting the answer right. Let's not be satisfied with the placebos. There's plenty of placebos. If your objective is just to feel better about it, there's lots of solutions. I can make one up in the next 5 minutes, so you'll feel great, right, about the solution. The trick is to measurably improve decisions. And how do the qualitative methods alleviate any of the issues that people think that quantitative models run into? They don't. They don't alleviate any of them. When you look at the actual data, the quantitative models are routinely outperforming all the qualitative stuff. So that's all I'll add, and I'm glad we're able to contribute.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Doug. And if any of you have any more questions on deep diving into the risk quantification side, feel free to go ahead and reach out to me and the team which is out there. Thank you so much for everybody for your time, and hope to see you again very soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.